Again, dude, you're a repeat. You're joining a very special
A
crew.
vaunted class, if you will.
You need a secret handshake or something. All right, dude, let's do it.
Let's do it, man.
What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your paperback copy of Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things they didn't teach you in school. Get 10% off your copy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book and use the promo code LISTENER when you check out. This week's episode is brought to you by Wix Studio. If you're thinking about redoing your portfolio or kicking off a new website project, listen up. I only have 30 seconds to tell you about Wix Studio, the web platform for agencies and enterprises. So here are a few things that you can do from start to finish in 30 seconds or less on Studio. You can adapt your designs for every device with responsive AI. You can jump seamlessly between front end and back end. You can speed up projects with an AI code assistant. You can start a design library, and you can reuse full stack apps and UI components across multiple sites. Well, time's up, but the list keeps going. Step into Wix Studio and see for yourself. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. This week's episode is brought to you by Mento Design Academy, where it's not just about learning UX design, it's about discovering your unique path in it. And Mento inspires students to use their passion as a driving force in their learning, and that's something that I've experienced firsthand as a mentor. I've been fortunate enough to guide students who are exploring concepts that they're truly passionate about. It's not just about following a curriculum, it's about shaping that curriculum around what excites each student. And seeing my students grow, apply their passions, and craft portfolios that are genuinely them, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. So if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento. And just for my listeners, use the promo code BeyondUX200 to get $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join these fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You can get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then tell your mom and them. I'd appreciate that. So there's something that I say, I think maybe on a constant basis, I probably say it too much. Actually, I don't know if I say it too much. I think I say it just enough. You can't build great software without great relationships. And as a testament to that, my good buddy, Matthew McPhail, second time on the show, by the way, joining an exclusive club, he's on to talk to us about how he managed to move from an industrial designer to a principal UX designer in not very much time compared to what a lot of people take to get to principal. And the reason, I think, and again, this is something I say all the time, a lot of times these career shifters, people that have been doing something for a long time, there's those soft, transitional, foundational skills that apply across the board, regardless of the hard skills. And Matthew has picked up on this, and he's used it to great effect, I would say. Matthew, you have done a fantastic job to get to where you are using relationships and understanding that. And I am so excited to have Matt on today to talk about it. Matthew McPhail graduated from the College for Creative Studies in 2009 with a BFA in industrial design. Early in his career as an industrial designer, he found that the most challenging problems often involve services and software, leading to a shift towards service and UX design. And as a multidisciplinary UX and CX practitioner, Matthew uses a human-centered approach to connect customer needs to business goals. His diverse background includes experiences at startups like Zenith, a Detroit-based football brand, and large organizations like General Motors and the Home Depot. He also worked at Sundberg Farrar, refining his UX skills on infotainment systems for clients like Nissan and Infiniti. Matthew is a UX principal at the Home Depot, focused on enhancing the pro customer experience through UX research, CX journey management, and UX strategy across the pro program. And when he's not working on helping to set the vision for the next generation of builders, he can often be found with his feet in the sand, on a beach in northern Michigan with his wife and 2 daughters, or furiously focused on building the latest and greatest Lego set, which if you're viewing on YouTube, you can see all right behind him right there. Matthew, welcome to Beyond UX Design once again, joining, as I said, a very exclusive club. How's it going, man? Great to have you back.
Dude, so good to be back, man. The vaunted Second Timers Club. Super stoked to be part of the rarefied air of Beyond UX participants. So super stoked to be here and glad to dig into this topic. I'm super passionate about it, man.
Hell yeah. And I think that shines through. And, I said this before, but you, Hong, Trevor, Debbie, y'all need to get together and make a secret Beyond UX Design repeat handshake next time.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah, man. So I read your bio there a little bit, but, you were on before. I know you gave us a little spiel about, I don't remember what episode that was, but if you're listening, go back and check that out. But you have been able to move quite rapidly from, starting UX, transitioning from industrial design. And last time you were on, we talked all about sort of going from that transition from industrial design to UX design. So if you're interested in that, that was a really fascinating conversation too. But you have managed to, and I don't even know when we talked last time, were you principal yet?
Yeah, I think it was a newly minted principal at the Home Depot. Started in a staff role and made a pretty quick ascension.
Absolutely, dude. And so I kind of gave it away when I introduced you there about the relationships piece. But one of the things that I want to get to today, I want to talk about how you've managed to get so far so fast. And I don't think it's a coincidence, and I don't think it's an accident. I personally feel like you have discovered the secret sauce to building great software. And that is also, I think, the secret sauce to advancing your career, which is relationships. So I kind of gave it away when I introduced you. But tell me a little bit about that background. And I know it's interesting. You were actually talking. You've done a lot of research on this and found some really insightful things. So I want to dig into that today. But what do you think? Do you think it was the relationships that kind of got you from where you are? And how do you feel relationships played into it? Or is it more than that?
I mean, I definitely think it was a primary factor, right? I mean, I think having a set of transferable skills, which I know you and I have talked about in a previous episode, were sort of part and parcel of that, right? Like not only having those skills, but identifying how they apply to an adjacent discipline like UX and service design was a journey, right? But I think what has really made me successful in my current role has much more to do with my ability to build relationships, and it really does my UX acumen, right? And so while I think the acumen piece is important, and right, as we get into this, we can talk a little bit more about how that plays into it. It's not everything, right? And building relationships to me really humanizes the workplace, particularly in remote environments, and it really gives you the ability to build that trust, build the empathy, and those things. And for me, like I think it's really easy to forget, right, that we are all human beings trying to push this rock up the hill together, right? To use an analogy. So for me, I lean very heavily into relationships, and I think it's been probably the single, other than just the transferable skills, which are just sort of like you check those boxes, right? Having the ability to build relationships is something that has been incredibly important throughout my career, both in terms of pivoting into UX and just being successful in general, right? So particularly at the Home Depot where we're remote, it's been a vital and essential component for me, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And to just be clear, before we even get into the conversation and anyone assumes that relationships trump everything else, having the hard skills and being able to do your job are absolutely essential. And I doubt anyone would have promoted you to principal without that knowledge, that base knowledge, the hard skills and things like that. But what I would argue, I've seen this personally firsthand. I mean, I personally have never made it to principal myself. I was senior staff last place I was at, but there are many people who have got the hard skills down that have not been able to get to that level of individual contributor. And, with all the hard skills, with all the knowledge they have, they still haven't gotten there. And I think that's a testament, one, to your abilities as a designer, but also your ability to harness that concept of relationships. So I want to dig into this a little bit. You mentioned this when we talked, and I think you mentioned just now, but relationships as one of the primary vehicles of your success. And could you talk about that a little bit? And because, when we say build relationships, it's a very nebulous term, right? What does that actually mean in real practical terms, especially for you and your team being remote? When someone says, the relationships are that primary factor, what does that actually look like in practice?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I'm very intentional about this, almost to the point of having kind of a framework and approach for building the relationship with anybody that I come across, right? And so for me, it's really looked a lot like making sure that I dedicate as much time as possible to simply getting to know a person, right? And so I think there are often times at work where we just index to work conversations, right? That we jump on the next meeting and it's immediately right into all the agenda items related to work. And one of the things about working in an office, right, that I think is true is that there are often these things that I call like the casual collision, right? Where you're on your way to the coffee maker or you're walking out to go to the car or you're just, you're doing something in the office that allows you to collide with someone organically. And so it's very easy in those environments, I think, to sort of just organically build those relationships over time, get to know people outside of the context of work, right? And so when I went remote and realized that like I've lost that advantage, I had to be really intentional about how I carved out time to do that and sort of create a surrogate, if you will, for those casual collisions. And so one of my big principles really is both with people that I already have relationships with, but certainly people that are new to a project or just new to me that I need to, work with, getting to know them and carving out time, meet and greets to leave work at the door and just talk about who they are as people and sort of what they're motivated by and what they're interested in and what they're into and right to the degree that they're comfortable and right you don't want to do it all at once but like over time get to know that person and then continue that practice, right? It's very easy to forget in the remote context that we're not just transacting all the time. And I think without that buffer of the casual collision of an in-office environment, it's very easy to just index to, got 30 minutes with you, we've got an agenda, we've got to bang this out, and there just leaves no time to just be humans. And it sounds a little bit corny, but man, it's just so true that like you have to carve out that time to just connect as human beings and just get to know each other outside of the context of the things that you're trying to do in a work capacity. So for me, that's really been my approach. Maybe some of that is personality, right? Like I call myself an extroverted introvert, but I've had to be intentional and had to make it part of my practice. And so I think anybody who's looking to build strong relationships need to start with just sort of acknowledging that you have to be intentional and carve out the time to do it and set up time with people to just get to know them, just do the meet and greet, just check in. And we can get into some more of the things I do here in a few, but be intentional about it really is my approach.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because that casual collision, I never heard that term before, but I actually really like that. That is one really great for those interpersonal relationships, the seedlings of a relationship, maybe, catching somebody, walk into their car, like, oh, I love that car, that kind of car, my dream car, whatever, start talking about cars. And now you got something in common. But it also helps with just context for the larger work that you're doing. And the relationship piece, this is where I think is like one of the reasons why I think it's so important is getting to know the people. One, helps to, have hard conversations later, right? It makes hard conversations easier, but it also gives you deeper context in the larger ecosystem or the system or, the whatever you guys are building. And it kind of helps with breaking down walls and silos when you start hearing about what other people are working on and overhearing conversations, people talking about things that like, you're like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Or, oh, that's interesting. We're doing something similar. Or, hey, I didn't realize you guys were doing that. That's something we need to start thinking about in our team. And especially in large enterprise teams where you often get different budgets, different managers, you sort of end up with silos and walls and things like that. And so, it just helps so much. And I want to get into some tactics and some tips on how to build those relationships in a few minutes. But what I want to understand first is you've been doing a lot of research on this and discovering the sort of biological the biology of relationships and things like that. And I want to talk about this before we talk about the tactics, really driving home the reason why this is so important. Because like you said, it does get a lot of people think it's kind of corny, and I've heard people poo-poo, the relationships piece. And it's like, oh, does a good design speaks for itself. I've heard so many people say that, and it blows my mind. So I want to get us all on the same page, everybody listening, about why this is so important. So talk a little bit about that, if you could, those biological foundations for relationships?
It's a really salient point, right? I think it goes back to the fact that, again, we're human beings. We're biological, right? And we're driven by those biologies, and we can't ignore that. I read a book a handful of years ago now called The Moral Molecule by Paul Zak, I think is his name. And really the takeaway is that oxytocin is essentially the moral molecule. And it's through his studies shown that it's linked to trust, empathy, cooperation, right? And just plays such a critical role in building bonds with people. One of the things with building relationships that I think is a really convenient and handy output, right, is trust. And you have to be in an environment where you trust one another. And when you get in those environments where you can trust that, hey, they always have the best interests of both the team, the customer, whoever in mind, even if you disagree, right? There's a deeply rooted respect there that sort of really, really keeps the team kind of flowing and going. And to me, like, collaboration, all of those things have to begin with sort of a shared purpose, high trust, and those sorts of things. And oxytocin, I mean, quite literally promotes those feelings of connection and shared goals. And he talks a little bit about how there's a converse to this. And I'm sure people have experienced this before with cortisol, where if you get into arguments or debates or you get heated and you start to maybe assume the worst about somebody else's intentions, right? Then you get into that fight and flight reaction, and our bodies literally shut down, right? All of the things that would allow us to empathize and rationalize, right? That all shuts down. And now you're dealing with this fight or flight response. And this quite literally happens in the workplace. So the book is really all about oxytocin as the chemical mechanism to building relationships and avoiding and solving conflicts. And to me, like, I always had this kind of it was hard to describe, right? This gut feel that if I built relationships with people, it just made work easier in a lot of ways. But I couldn't put my finger on exactly why, other than just we were friendly. Well, I mean, there's a biology there. That book really, like, was the missing link for me to understand what's actually happening biologically in these environments. And again, it sounds crazy and kind of, harebrained, but it's, again, we are biological beings, and it's a very profound way to quantify biologically the importance of building a relationship, operating from trust, operating from best intentions, right? And has been very enlightening for me. And I highly recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, it makes total sense too. And it's interesting too, because as, UX designers, as UX professionals, we talk about empathy for users. We talk about empathy for, customers, and we very rarely ever really dig into empathy for stakeholders, and so what I love about this too, and the biology behind this is we often treat stakeholders as the other. We often tend to, not take that human approach to the people that we work with, stakeholders, product managers. I say this all the time. I go back to Config when, Airbnb announced they were getting rid of product managers, and the the whole freaking audience erupted in applause. It's very telling, right? What those relationships are like on those teams. Obviously, they're very fraught, and they probably don't get along well with a lot of those folks. And taking a step back and realize we're just humans. We are all humans. And I love what you said a minute ago about, understanding the fact and recognizing the fact that we are all trying to build the best possible thing we can build. Nobody's on the team thinking, I'm going to build shit. I'm just going to build a bunch of crap that nobody wants. And I mean, I don't know, maybe some people are. I'm sure that happens somewhere. But for the most part, most people are trying to do the best work they possibly can. And recognizing, one, that, relationships make it easier. But then I think it might even be easier for some of us too to realize that there is a biological reason behind it. And those chemicals in our brain actually help us to do better work. And if you really care about users, you'll, empathy for your stakeholders so that you can all find the best path forward and build the best software. So I love that. And the other thing too that I think about is, as UX professionals, we talk about psychology and all these other things. And it makes perfect sense to me to think about the psychology and the biology behind why this is a great tactic. And I love that concept. So I want to talk a little bit about, the elements of great relationships. And then we can talk about from there, I think, how we can actually go about building them, understanding the foundations for them. So, from your perspective, when you think about relationships, what are some key aspects of it? You mentioned trust a second ago, but some things that we need to start thinking about as UX professionals to build relationships with those people that we work with every day to ultimately sort of maybe they're like planting the seeds, little seedlings of the relationships to get those to grow and blossom.
Yeah. So I have a pretty simple framework for how I kind of define, when we say like, so we have a value at Home Depot called building strong relationships. And so the interesting word in that is strong. Okay, so what makes a relationship strong to me? So I think it's three parts. And so the first one, we've talked about it. It is trust, right? And really what I mean by that is just an environment where the people that you work with day in, day out can faithfully count on you and vice versa, right? They're always going to honor their end of the bargains and you're always going to honor yours. You're always going to have positive intent and assume positive intent in everything that your teammates are doing. And when you trust folks, you have a willingness and a desire to help them succeed, right? Because it's that rising tide raises all ships thing. And the other thing that I think trust can do that we don't talk about enough, I think, is create an environment where it's okay and safe to be vulnerable without repercussion, right? I think, again, this is getting back to the fact that we're human. The vulnerability piece for me is a really important key because as someone who is a quote unquote career shifter into UX, particularly once I took the job here, I had no enterprise user experience or enterprise software experience whatsoever. And so while I had a lot of transferable skills, I had a methodology, I was good at building relationships, I had to create environments of trust such that I could be vulnerable with people, create a trust with them such that I could say, I don't know what that means, right? We're talking about a particular minutia to the agile process, right? I don't know what this is. Tell me what this is. And so often in environments, you don't have that trust. And so you either act like you know what they're talking about when you don't, or there's just not that safety to be vulnerable. So to me, again, that's all kind of part of trust. The second piece that I think is an absolute requirement is respect, right? And that's just really about an environment where everyone feels empowered to have a perspective and to share it. And it also means that the environment is likely a diverse and creative place where everyone can contribute, everyone can provide input. I think of it as like an everyone is welcome mentality, right? To contribute in meaningful ways. And so for me, you have to be really intentional about that and acknowledge honestly the skills that each individual brings to the team. And when I think about respect in terms of that everyone is welcome mentality, I intentionally use the word our a lot when I talk about work and experiences. It's very easy for either a product person or a UX person or a business partner, whomever it is in the organization, to talk about my initiatives, the things I am trying to do, my team. And I always try to inject the word our as much as I can because I truly believe that that's the case, that this is our company. This is our effort. This is our goals. And the more that I say that, hopefully the more subconsciously I think people start to feel that way. And so I would think that the third piece to building relationships, particularly strong ones, and it's related to the other two, is empathy. And this is going to be the one that I would assume just about everybody listening to us today is going to be familiar with as designers, right? Empathy is it's table stakes, right? It's sort of innate in most of us. But I think of empathy in kind of two ways. So there's like cognitive empathy and emotional empathy. And when we think about relationships, I'll land this plane. So cognitive to me is the ability to understand another person's perspective, right? Like be able to rationalize what they're saying and understand where they're coming from and sort of make it make sense in your own mental model. Emotional empathy is the one I think most of the time we're talking about when we say empathy, which is like to feel what someone else feels, right? So I think in order to build strong relationships, you kind of have to employ both, creating an environment where, we're always considerate of other partners' feelings, perspectives, and also that how they think about something may be the right way, and leaving open the possibility at all times that that their perspective might be the right approach for our next steps is a really, really powerful thing. And I think it also helps people make the, delta, if you will, between how I'm thinking about something and how you're thinking about something a little bit more like practical and tangible, right? Sometimes it's hard to see another person's view because you're holding your own point of view so close. But that cognitive empathy to me is huge. And so I would say that the trust, respect, and empathy are to me like the three-legged stool of strong relationships, if you will.
Yeah, I love that. And, speaking about, psychological safety and things like that and trying to build it on your team, I think it was Google. Was it Google that did the research maybe 5, almost 10 years ago now about what makes a high performing team? And they found that it was not the hard skills. It was not the ability of the people. It was not the experience. Even a lot of times it was psychological safety, giving people permission to ask stupid questions, giving people, permission to screw up and make mistakes, learn from those mistakes, growth mindset, things like that. That created more than anything else the high performing team. And, I think like the language that you use, for instance, matters greatly. Just saying our, we instead of my and I, that I think is an excellent tip. We is something I say all the time as well, and it's funny even when I'm talking about like beyond UX designers, it's just
Right,
where it
yeah.
literally is just me. I'm still in the habit just from saying, oh, just we do this and we do that when I'm talking to like potential sponsors or something, which is funny, which is like, I don't makes it sound like I have a team, but I'm not trying to be, not trying to make it sound like we're bigger than we are. It's just I'm so used to saying we that I have a really hard time with that. So I love that you say that too, and I never really put that together. I always just I don't know. For me, it was like I never made the conscious connection between trying to promote that to get other people. I was just always like trying to, especially as like as a design lead and a team lead, getting my team to understand that like it's not my thing, it's all of our thing. So, but it was sort of from a different angle, but it's still I think it had ultimately the same effect. So I love that. And again, like the empathy, like just understanding the team and again, building the relationships, it's important for that. But then just coming up with ideas and coming up with different ways of thinking and changing your mental model to align more with the stakeholders so that not to change your opinion necessarily, but even when you bring an idea up, how do you frame it in a way that connects with their mental model, understanding where they're coming from? It's impossible to do that if you don't understand where they're coming from, right? And, the language we use again, like thinking about like constantly using UX buzzwords that those other stakeholders are never going to have. When we talk about language, that matters. And so when you're having a conversation with them and you're using these big buzzwords that they don't understand, even if you're not necessarily talking about some very specific work thing, it makes them feel stupid. It makes them feel like they don't know what you're talking about. And so you end up with that disconnect. And then, the ultimate result there is just that lack of trust because they're just like, every time I talk to the person, I don't know what's going on because they use these silly big words, right? So like, I just love that. I mean, that idea of empathy, I don't know. It applies to so many things, and I really,
Well,
really
and I
enjoy
think
that.
too, what it's allowed me to do, and something that I noticed that's kind of somewhat pervasive in a workplace, or can be pervasive, I should say, is I think empathy and building a genuine empathy on the team also just helps you avoid the pitfalls of negative assumptions about motives and intents, right? And I think what I've noticed throughout my career in building relationships and just being in meetings and things like that is that I have to be hyper vigilant and conscious of sort of my perspective in terms of like the idea and the person, right? And always having respect for the person and the respects that they produce helps you avoid those pitfalls because what happens is if you have some sort of negative sentiment or assumption about their intent, everything that they're talking about in that call, you're not hearing. It also gets to that like listen to understand, not respond thing. But those negative feelings and the pitfalls associated with that are a major time suck in terms of just getting alignment, getting things done, and working together. And I know it's difficult, but I always say that's a choice, right? There are certainly data points that would lead anyone to believe what they believe about anybody else based on things that they've observed, they've heard, what have you. But I find that it's just easier in a lot of ways to, whenever I possibly can, assume positive intent and avoid those pitfalls. Because even if there's something about that person that I'm not crazy about, there's something in their message and their perspective that not only I need to listen to see if I think it's actually valuable, but also to just understand how they're incentivized, how they're motivated, what are their goals, right? Like there are things in that perspective, even if you feel a certain kind of way about the coworker, right? That are going to give you a few more data points around how they think, what they're motivated by, and how you can actually make a deeper connection with that person. Empathy to me is, again, it's table stakes, not only for the work we do as designers, but to build relationships. It's just part and parcel.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you mentioned something I want to circle back to in a few minutes, but you mentioned this idea that, trying to assume positive intent as much as possible. And I want to acknowledge that there are going to be times when you come across people who do not have a positive intent
Yeah.
and are actually in very toxic situations and things like that. I want to circle back to that in a little bit, but I want to acknowledge that at least right now, because I know whenever I say assume positive intent, I get feedback all the time. It's like, well, I work with this person and then blah blah, and they were misogynist, racist, and that absolutely exists 100%. There's no gaslighting here. I'm not discrediting that, but I think those are the outliers. And I'm going to circle back to that and see if you have any advice for how to deal with those situations in a few minutes. But before we do that, there was something that you mentioned the last time we talked that I want to dig into a little bit more. And it was the performance image exposure framework for how you present yourself. Because a lot of this, it's building relationships, it's conversations between people, but it's also that trust comes because you have set yourself up so that people can trust you. And this PI framework, you called it, and the performance image exposure framework, I think helps to build that. You have to have these things in order for someone else to trust you. Can you dig a little bit into that and how that applies to this concept of, building relationships?
Yeah, I think it's a really good. There's definitely a relationship there, and so Pi, and we talk about this a lot at work, and we use this model. It's really just a theory of like, how people are successful in their careers, and sort of what are the most basic elements of that professionally. And so, you said it right. The P is performance. So you've got to perform extremely well. But the more and more that this kind of thing gets studied in terms of like organizational design and sort of professional success, the more data supports the fact that your performance, is really only about 10 to maybe 20% of the overall pie, if you will, pun intended, for getting the next promotion, right? For ascending in your given organization or your craft. It's table stakes, right? We've got to perform well. I mean, it's almost a binary thing. You either are performing well or you're not. And of course, there's gradations of that, of course. But people assume, man, if I just do my job really well and I kill it and I'm a rock star and I perform, great things are going to happen for me. And in an organizational context, that's just unfortunately not how it usually shakes out. And so the other two pieces for me, image and exposure, are all about building relationships and then letting those relationships do things for you, which, we'll get into in a minute, that you can't do when you're in a room. And so the image to me is, you almost think of it like brand, right? Like what do people say about you if they're asked like, hey, what do you think about Jeremy? What do you think about Matt, right? It's those qualities and attributes that you hopefully naturally exude in a workplace. And so whether we like that or not, right, image is a component to informing sort of the way in which other people in an organization think about you and consider you. And so it's worth building relationships for people, getting close to as many people as you can, such that they can get consistent data around the type of person that you are and what your brand is and what your qualities are and sort of how you approach different types of work and different types of challenges. And then finally, like, is exposure, right? And I get a lot of eye rolls when I talk about this. And it's, I get why people sometimes think that like, oh, it's such a silly thing to think about matters. But, studies show something like 60% of success can be attributed to just how exposed you are to the right people and that the right people know you, right? And depending on your professional aspirations, right, you should take advantage of those opportunities to get close to leaders, take advantage to lead different company events or company initiatives, or I mean, even things like we've got a lot of different like kind of like what we call like VOC groups. And so get involved in, various events that bring people together in the workplace. It's literally just making sure that people know, number one, who you are, that you exist, and that you have this set of qualities. And whether we like that or not, right? Whether we think that that's unfair, I mean, I get some of that criticism, but visibility is just important, and particularly if you're a remote worker, right? Which again, this gets back to me building relationships. People got to know who I am. They got to know that I exist. They got to know the qualities about me and the way that I work, particularly if I'm not working with them all the time. That visibility to the right people, right, and at the right time can pay a lot of dividends for your own success inside the organization. So that pie model for me, particularly the I and the E, are really tied and braided very closely to building those strong relationships and sort of how you get the I and the E, so to speak.
Yeah. And again, this is sort of something I think, I've been saying for a long time is, the relationship piece, it helps build great software, but it also helps you with career growth, advancement, promotions, raises, all those things, new opportunities, especially internally if you're, moving within your own company. And what I love about this PI framework is it sort of adds a scientific foundation to that via, the studies that have been done that actually show that performance is a very minor piece of this image and exposure actually is. And I think it's worth, like you said, calling out the criticisms. But again, it's one of those things that this is human nature, right? It's just like we say, like, don't judge a book by its cover. We say that because we do judge books by their covers. And so it's important to understand that people judge books by their covers so that you can plan your career or you can plan your book design accordingly, right? And so in this case, understanding image and exposure is important. As someone who might be neurodivergent, might be introverted, who might not be willing to go and do those things, you could say, well, it's not fair. And I agree, it is not fair. But this is how humans work, and this is how organizations tend to work. And so if you want to advance your career, getting out there, getting in front of the people who make the decisions about hiring, about promotions, that is going to impact, your work, the quality of your work, the quality of your career growth, the amount of money you make, how soon you can retire, like all of those things. It's just how humans work, and it's unfair, but it is something to consider. And if you feel like you are neurodivergent or you are introverted, at least knowing that that's the case can maybe help you plan your strategy around that. And we should all have a strategy. Hopefully you do. So I just really love that framework. I'm glad we're bringing it.
Yeah, it's so important. And you bring up a great point, I think, related to this around neurodivergence and introversion, both of which I am. And so this is why, again, I go back to the trust factor. And this is, a plea to all of your listeners who have a responsibility in leadership and building culture. That is part of building trust, building that authentic ability to bring vulnerability to the workplace and to your relationships allows those people that are not naturally gifted in speaking or, sharing their point of view or doing things that are more, extroverted, allows them to help flourish, right? So it's part of, it's creating that environment where you can account for those folks, again, which I am both. And I think for me, it wasn't easy at first, right? I am the the guy that, like, if I'm in a crowded area, I might typically find a corner and do something on my phone, right? Or just try to space out. But I also realized that there's a cost to being that type of person in a workplace, and it doesn't align with what my goals are career-wise. So at some point you got to make a decision about recognizing that growth and comfort don't coexist. So how do I make myself uncomfortable in ways that will help me? And when the environment is trustworthy and has vulnerability, it's a lot easier. And I just think, it's the way to be.
I love that. Yeah. And so here's what I want to do now. I want to get into some tips, some tricks, some tactical advice that you can help folks listening start to build some of those relationships as it applies to the context of your work with your team, but also the relationships with maybe even some of those people outside. Like we said, the getting the exposure, being in front of the right people so that you can get opportunities and promotions and all that stuff. So I want to talk a little bit about that. So, tell me some advice. What's some advice for somebody who's listening, who is maybe focused, only on like Figma skills? I'm going to learn all the Figma skills or whatever hard skills they want to learn, and has kind of put some of this stuff to the back burner. Where's a place to start?
Yeah, I have a very repeatable, consistent framework that I follow for this. I'm also a high C on the disc if you do the disc profile. So there's no wonder why like everything I do has some sort of like framework, involved with it. So really for me, it's like 5 or 6 things, and we started with the one at the beginning that I think has been important for me in my success. But it is number one, being very intentional about dedicating as much time as possible to just simply getting to know one another. So particularly when you're on a new team and you're in that, that cliche storming phase, right? You can get through the storm a lot more quickly if you really just carve out the time to get to know one another. And what I would say is this is not, for whatever reason, at least it's been my experience, this is not like a default thing that people typically do on teams, particularly remote teams. And so I think you have to be intentional about it. And you have to find folks that are also certainly willing to do that. I will tell you that, like, hey, there's probably, I don't know, 10, 15% maybe of people that are just not interested in getting to know you. But like that's a data point, right? That's helpful for you to know, right? And so the large vast majority of the time I find that people are willing to and welcome time away from work to just get to know one another. So number one, dedicate as much time as you can to just simply getting to know. That's setting intentional one-on-one, setting meet and greets, putting time on the calendar without a work agenda to just plainly explain, hey, I'm just, we're going to be working together, or hey, we're going to be doing this thing together. I want to get to know you and learn how to work with you. And so that's the first thing. I would say the second thing is like continue doing that, right? Don't just set the one meet and greet and then never talk to them again about their dog or their kid's basketball practice or things, right? Engage in a continuous one-to-one practice with people to find opportunities to dive more deeply into not only their motivations and goals, but like their experiences at work, right? So talk to them about what they're seeing, what their perspectives are, talk about outside interests as much as you can. And to me, like it just over time helps build that trust. Oh, they're starting to tell me things that are a little bit like, ooh, that might have been uncomfortable. They might have felt like a little risky telling me that or whatever. And over time, you're going to build this trust with them. And then the third thing that I do a lot, and I do this authentically, I don't do this for the optics, is I find opportunities to heap praise and support for partners. And so, that looks like things as small as if you're on a group call and they're talking about a piece of work, I might throw in the Teams chat, like Jeremy did a really fantastic job on this and was super helpful for figuring out this really ambiguous piece. Heap the praise on. What that does is, number one, gives them the dopamine hit and the oxytocin boost, right? But it also signals to them that I am a genuine partner and I am committed and invested in your support, which is ultimately our sort of success. And so like those are kind of the 3, what I would say, major soft skill pieces that I typically do. The fourth thing I would say is, and we talked about this kind of at the beginning too, right, is you have to find ways to pull your weight and demonstrate your capabilities and your value. And so this is where like the hard still stuff might creep in a little bit, but like none of the other things really matter if like when it comes time and you're up at the plate, you're always striking out, right? Like you have to have a set of capabilities and skills and things that you're bringing to the team. And you have to demonstrate that, because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a stand-up or I've been in a meeting and somebody didn't do the thing that they said they were going to do. Like it just totally erodes my ability to trust them and be confident in them. And what that then does subconsciously is kind of creates this desire potentially to maybe want to spend less time with them, because my time is finite. Where am I going to dedicate my time and resources? And if I've got somebody who's not demonstrating their ability to pull weight and contribute, that becomes a major problem for me, right? So it's like always find ways, not in a braggadocious or fancy way, but just demonstrate your commitment to honoring your piece of the puzzle. And this is a personality thing for me, but I have found it to be useful for me. And another kind of authentic thing that I do, kind of like heaping praise, is as much as I can without it being a distraction, I try to inject general just positivity and levity into as many interactions as I can. And sometimes this comes in the form of like a little bit of like, humble self-deprecation. Sometimes this comes like, cracking a joke at somebody else's, expense. Obviously it's not, nothing serious, but I find that getting people to just laugh a little bit at work, right? It lowers the temperature a little bit, particularly when we're in moments that are maybe a little bit stressful. And it helps again humanize you and build that trust with those people. And then I would say the last thing that I do as often as I can, and I do this also with our leadership quite a bit, is I check in. So outside of like official touch points where we're like, scheduled to have time together on the calendar, I'm reaching out to any number of people on a daily basis and just saying, "Hey, Jeremy, how's it going, man? How are you? How are you feeling today? How's your work going?" And it's these little things like that, I think, that number one can become a little bit of like a welcome distraction for a few moments for people who may be having a challenging day at work or something. It also helps remind them that, dang it, we're human. There's somebody out there that cares about both my success and our success. And it can help release just a little bit of stress. And I think it's also just, admittedly, I don't have scientific evidence necessarily to support this, but I think it's a little bit contagious. I think the more that I can focus on being positive and just checking in on people, the more often I find out that at some point later that week it was paid forward and they went and checked on somebody to just see how they're doing. And I think people just gravitate to other people who make them feel better, right? That's again another natural human thing, is to want to be around people that make me feel a little bit better either about the work or me as a person or all of the above. And so those are kind of like, my cheat sheet, if you will, of things that I do very intentionally with people to build those relationships. And, so far it's worked pretty well. And I think there's a lot of value in doing those things.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I just can't stress enough just the outcomes that happen with a lot of these things. When you talk about problems that designers, UX professionals tend to have with the rest of their team, right? Go through the list. You've got engineers who go off and design a thing and you don't, you see the end result and it looks nothing like what you designed. When you've got that great relationship with those engineers, I can tell you from my own personal experience that they are going to come to you when they have a question if they enjoy your interactions. And if they get something positive out of it, I'm telling you, they're going to come to you and they're going to ask you before they go build a thing because they don't want to build something wrong. If you're a pain in the ass and you're standoffish or they don't know you well because they've never really had any interaction with you, they're going to go off and do what they think is correct. And you won't find out about it until it's been pushed to production or it's in the demo or whatever. And it's already, by that time, it's too late, right? So, that's just an example. Great relationship with engineers. Product managers, we get this like constantly butting head with product managers. When they understand what you can do, how you can help, what value you bring to maybe discovery calls or discovery or something, I can tell you they're going to involve you, right? They're not going to avoid you. A lot of times I think, that butting heads with product managers often comes because there is such an overlap with their job. Not having those conversations means you're not setting expectations. They don't know what to expect from you. You don't know what to expect from them. They're making assumptions. You're making assumptions about what each should be doing. And so often those assumptions don't align. And then you end up with missed expectations. And then you're mad at each other, right? And so those conversations are incredible. It helps your, building better software for sure that way. Stakeholders, the relationships help you with context. It helps you with empathy. It helps you understand their perspective, the things they care about, so that when you go to sell an idea, you're speaking from their, with their language, you're using their mental model and you're selling directly to what they care about. And, you don't have the issues with, being ignored, not having a seat at the table, whatever it is your problem, at work is having. And so I just, there's so many just benefits to this. It blows my mind that some people just don't necessarily think this way. So what I want to talk about next, I want to talk about some of these things where you've got these people in your team that they're terrible. They're awful. And I will say I worked at a big giant multinational conglomerate for 8 years or so. I can't remember. I've worked with probably hundreds of people, maybe a handful of times. I had people that were I would consider awful, terrible people that I'm just like like, how do you still have a job? So I'm curious when you get, often especially when we work in big companies, we don't have a choice. You could quit, I guess, but maybe finding a job is easier said than done. What are some ways to deal with some of these people that just don't want to engage, don't want to deal with you. Maybe they're mean, maybe they're toxic, maybe they're racist, misogynist, these things. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, so to your point, right? Like it's inevitable, right? Like I would love to tell you that I'm batting 1,000 when it comes to building relationships with people, right? But we know that's not true. So I think maybe the first lesson that I think I learned probably just through going through that and sort of having a retrospective after the fact is that you can't take the behavior personally. I think one of the things that's really important is just to recognize that like often that behavior typically reflects their own insecurities or stress or inability to emotionally regulate, right? Or what it is. And it's not an indictment of your worth either as a UX professional, design professional, or as a person. The other thing I would say, and I tried to do in these situations is kind of seek context, I guess is the way I put it. What are maybe some of the reasons that they're behaving the way that they're behaving? Like what are the underlying reasons that is sort of causing them to feel this way? Could it be workload? Is it maybe personal issues, which not necessarily your business, but like just good to know? Is it just that they're poor communicators? Is it that their leadership is expecting an absolute boatload of work that's just unrealistic from just a pure bandwidth perspective, right? There's almost always going to be reasons why they're this way. It doesn't mean that you're there to fix them. It doesn't mean that you should have to fix them or feel like you need to fix them. But oftentimes I find if I've got somebody that's difficult and I begin to understand, I mean, this has happened to me before. It happened to me fairly recently where I just had a partner who was just like, I mean, just decreeing work, right? And sort of being very inflexible in hearing alternative points of view and just had no interest in like hearing anybody else's perspective and just basically wanted to mandate the work to be done and for UX to just go and push the pixels. And I could have just walked away and not taken that personally and just said, well, that person's just an asshole, right? But what I did instead sat back and said, like, okay, there's a reason that there's this way. It's probably right a multitude of things. But what I did was I actually just found a 15-minute slot with them as a follow-up to the meeting. And I just very directly asked, like, hey, it seems like there's some urgency here. Help give me context for the urgency because I don't have it. Help me understand sort of why we're having to sort of work at this pace. And he basically unloaded and said, look, man, like, I've got a senior director breathing down my neck that needs a bunch of results by the end of the quarter and we're running out of time. Right. So like, okay, well now I have a data point and now I have a way in to maybe help him with spreading the load out or maybe taking some of that burden off his shoulders possibly. Right. So there's always a reason. So seeking context, I think, is important. The other thing too, I would just say, easier said than done, but I think is really important is I think it's totally okay to set some boundaries, right? Like be clear and firm. Like, hey, if we're wandering into territory that's just genuinely unkind or disrespectful, right? I have no problem holding my hand up and saying, hey, we can disagree, but we're going to have to disagree, respectfully here. Not everyone's willing to do that, but I think setting boundaries for your own, safeguarding your own mental health, right, is super important. And you talked a lot about words. I mean, I think particularly in these situations, your words matter a ton, right? So like I try to use very neutral, non-confrontational language to express whatever concern I might have, right? Make sure that it doesn't have any sort of like accusatory slant to it, but rather this is Matt being genuinely curious about trying to better understand the situation. And so going back to that example that I gave, when I had that conversation, I almost to a self-deprecating degree said, hey, there's just something I'm not getting here. Like help make this more tractable for me. What's causing this urgency? What have I missed that I need to know to feel the same sense of urgency? And having that conversation both helped him understand that I'm here to understand what's motivating him and he's incentivized by, but also that I am here to help. I could, like I said, just not had that conversation and just assumed, well, he's just a jerk, but I didn't. And so it gets to that like active listening piece, right? Of like setting aside time to really attempt to understand the context and understand. And again, right, you may find out again, like that context is they're just a hurt person. They've got things going on in their personal life or whatever that like no amount of moving mountains at work is really going to solve. That's not your hill to die on. That's not your thing to solve. But knowing that, again, it's helpful to build a little bit of empathy and not take everything that's coming out of that toxicity personally, which is really a key thing that I would tell anybody.
Yeah, I love that. And the other thing that I was just thinking about too, like if you, let's say you've got someone who's just like an absolute awful person to work with, maybe you have the conversation and it doesn't work, nothing gets better. The other advantage to building great relationships is the chances are very good the other people in your team are having a problem with this person as well. And if you're not having conversations with the other people in your team, there's no way for you to know that. And so I'm not saying you need to go gang up on the guy, whatever, but there are ways to build allies that can come together to figure out how to get this situation resolved, whether that's as a team, reporting them to ombuds if you have an ombudsman or something, or reporting them to HR or going to their manager or having somebody else talk to their manager who is a peer of that person or someone whose manager can talk to them or something, whatever it is. But those relationships can also help find a resolution to some of this as well. And so, the other thing I think about when I go back to this is, having conversations like you mentioned a minute ago, thinking about the I and the E in the pie framework, right? It doesn't matter if you are the best goddamn UX designer and you are amazing at your craft. If that person that matters doesn't see this as beneficial for them, doesn't help them, you're not going to, maybe you don't get a good end of year review or whatever it is, or performance review suffers, right? And so that impacts your career. And so I think at the end of the day, there's also, I would have personally no problem with this. And I'm curious what you think is, they want to do something that's not right. And you say, okay, let's do it wrong. I'm going to be a team player, go with the rest of the team and just do what you asked me to do. I tried to make it better. It didn't work. And so I'm going to, default to that IE and maybe I'll let that performance piece for this particular feature, whatever it is. I don't know. I'm not going to make real personas. I'm going to use proto personas, or I'm not going to create like high fidelity wire, or the interaction design isn't as good as it could be, or whatever it is. And just sort of saying, all right, you know what? I'm going to be a team player, go with the flow and just get paid. Because at the end of the day, this is a job, So I don't know how you feel about that, but that's just my the way I like to deal with some of the people when I get this.
Dude, those are both great points. I mean, you've spurred another kind of like anecdotal story for me. I mean, like one of the things that I will do in situations like that is exactly what you say. So, like, here's maybe like another like salient example that speaks to what you're talking about. So, it's not uncommon for a product partner to come to you and say like, "Hey, I need a journey, right? I need a journey map, right? Or I need." Insert artifact here. In having a conversation with them to understand the objectives behind the artifact, you uncover, no, actually what I think would help you here is more of a service blueprint, right? Or whatever it is. You kind of have two decisions there. And I think sometimes based on how you think the relationship is going and the value that will bring them, sometimes you do the thing that they ask for anyway and explain, here's how I think the value for you will be limited. Here's the ways in which I think we can add some value to the thing. But I'm going to do the thing that you're asking for because I want to support you and I want you to look good to your leaders because ultimately, again, the rising tide raises all ships. But in the background, what that's doing, to your point, is it's building trust with them and it's building this reciprocity where now they're going to come to me and trust me to provide more input on a particular objective or key result. They may come back to me and say, hey, what do you think about the way that I'm thinking about prioritizing the roadmap, whatever it is, right? So when you do those small things that are kind of low lips most of the time, hopefully, right, you build a little bit of equity. And it gets to that concept of like the deposits and withdrawals in a relationship. And I'm always cognizant of making more deposits than I do withdrawals, but you can't make a withdrawal if there's nothing in that bank, right? And so down the road, when we talk, we'll probably talk about benefits of relationships here in a minute. One of those benefits is like, to have not only build some professional capital, but like create some allies that number one are kind of defending you and being an ally for you when you're not in that room, right? Whether it's from a UX perspective or from a personal perspective. But the other thing it does is create additional resources for you down the road to go back to when you need something. And so it's almost like that mentorship relationship where you're just asking the mentor for things, but you're not actively depositing into the relationship. Same thing is true here, right? Like there have been several times in my career where I have worked diligently and intentionally to build a relationship. And it may be like 9 months down the road, I've got a question or I've got a need. I'm like, you know what? Like, I know Jeremy's going to know the answer to this and probably know be able to help me out. And I'll reach out to that person. Sure enough, they've got the right artifact or the right answer or the right connection to the other person to get the answer. And like those withdrawals, those favors to me are incredible, valuable capital for anybody in a workplace. And so it really is sometimes about making the decision about, I'm here to be helpful. I'm not here to be right all the time. And I'm going to do the thing that you think that you need so you can meet the expectations of your leadership in the moment. But while that's happening, we're going to have some discussions about what's the long-term play and approach here to do this the right way. And I'm going to build the trust such that when I say things, you trust that there's value and validity to that, and we're going to do it. And so, yeah, those 2 points you brought up are absolutely great ones, and I totally agree.
I love it. All right, dude. So we have had you for a little while now. I know you got a hard stop in a few minutes here. We got to get you out of here. I got some this or that questions I like to ask all my my repeat guests to help our listeners get to know our guests even better, because we asked you 5 little questions last time. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go back and find out Matt's favorite non-design book, favorite podcast, all that stuff. Before we do that, though, any closing thoughts, anything we didn't get a chance to talk about that you think is worth noting here as it relates to relationships?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of ground, and, hopefully your audience, finds us useful and actionable, which I think is the most important piece, right? Is there's something they can take away and implement, right? It's certainly something when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm always looking for what's a nugget I can take into my own life and work. And so hopefully that's an outcome today. I would think maybe one final thing I would mention that I think is really important as a soft skill is our ability to manage ambiguity. And it comes up all the time in enterprise software, right? You know this. And if you have strong relationships, and one of the things I've learned with strong relationships is it allows me to better manage highly ambiguous situations, because it just creates an environment where I have a trusted partner, we have some vulnerability, and it's okay to admit to them, things aren't adding up. I'm not tracking here. I'm not seeing it yet. Something's foggy. More often than not, what you're going to find out is you're not alone, right? They're feeling that too. But I would say that managing ambiguity is something that any, staff and above principal UX is going to have to be able to do really, really well. And again, I go back to building relationships as the way in which I can do that in a vulnerable environment. And, to your point, the other thing you said, I would say if you're doing this right, what you should be able to observe, and if you're really geeky, might even measure, is work just gets done faster. Period. When you have trust and you have alignment, even if you disagree and commit, as they say, work gets done faster in strong relationships. And so those maybe would be the 2 parting thoughts I'd leave for everybody listening today.
I love it. Yeah. Worst case scenario, right? You make a couple friends, right?
Yeah.
But best case scenario, your job's just that much easier. So, I think it's just, why the hell not? Why not do it? That's a big question. Why not do it? What do you lose? What do you have to lose? All right, Matthew, we got 20 silly this or that questions that I like to ask all my repeat guests. First thing that comes to your mind, you don't have to think too hard about it. I'm going to just go through this list, 20 questions. You ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right, man, let's do it. All right. Would you rather time travel to the past or to the future?
Past.
All right. Would you rather an invisibility cloak or the ability to fly?
Fly.
All right. Would you rather space travel or deep sea exploration?
Space. Keep me out of the water. That terrifies me. The deep sea is the scariest place on earth, man.
It is. That's why we need to explore it, though.
Oh.
We barely explore it. All right. Do you remember? I don't know if you were big. You big on you a big Star Trek fan?
I mean, my parents watched Next Generation when I was younger. I know of it. I'm not a huge Star Trek.
All right. So there was, and I guess it was in this was the late 90s because I was in high school. They had a show with the dude from Jaws. I can't remember his name. Anyway, he was the captain of a sub. Basically, it was like Star Trek, but under the water. It was called Sequest. Anyway, Sequest. I always I don't know what it is. I just like Sequest. Always I don't know. It's kind of cool. All right. Would you rather live in a world without coffee or a world without music?
Well, without coffee. I can live without coffee. Not a coffee person.
Really? Oh, man. How do you do design work without coffee?
Well, hold on. I don't do it without caffeine. I do it without coffee.
Okay. What's your caffeine fix then?
Honestly, and I should cut back on it, but I typically tip back a sugar-free energy drink every morning that's got, some complex vitamins and stuff in it. So, but again, I should probably be kicking back on that too.
The caffeine.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, dude. Would you rather have a rewind button or a pause button like Zach from Saved by the Bell?
Oh, man. This question hits different when you're a parent, man. Oh, geez. I think I would pick the rewind button because that's sort of in effect also a pause.
Oh, that's a good point.
If I rewind far enough.
That's true. Well, I have a pause and you can just rewind and just go back. Yeah, that's true. I never thought of that. All right. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to stop asking that question because that don't make some sense. All right. Would you rather live in a treehouse or a bunker? Like a really cool bunker, not just like a, like a badass.
I definitely think I would rather live in a bunker because a bunker to me implies like temperature control. I'm not an outdoor tent guy.
Okay.
I'm not a rough it guy.
Really? Okay.
And treehouse is too close to camping for me.
Okay. All right. I feel you. All right. No, I won't judge. All right. Would you rather live in a world where everyone whispers or everyone shouts?
Whispers, 100%.
Whispers.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
All right. Would you rather have a nose that glows like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or ears that flap like Dumbo?
Oh, man. Probably the ears because hopefully I'd find a beanie big enough to hide it when I need to.
And you could fly.
Well, there you go. There we go.
I don't know. Yeah, I guess unless you need Santa to guide you through the snow in a blizzard, you probably don't need the red nose. All right. Would you rather go on a cruise with your boss or never go on vacation again? Your boss isn't listening. Don't worry.
Oh, 100%. I would go on a cruise with my boss all day. I mean, we've got a strong relationship, man. I think it'd be fun.
That's true. All the relationship we built.
Yeah, that's it.
You guys hang out, get some Mai Tais, and build that relationship, make it even stronger. Man. All right. Would you rather True Value or Ace Hardware? As someone who
oh, boy. This is a trap. Man.
At least I didn't say Lowe's.
Well, yeah. So I think probably Ace Hardware. And the only reason I say this is it's the only place in town that sells the barbecue rubs that I like for smoking. And so I'm actually...
the Ace always has
So,
the Weber stuff.
I'm in there and, it's okay as long as it's not something we sell at the Home Depot. So I'm going to go Ace.
I love it. You know what I miss though is that smell of like of a hardware store from like back in the day.
Yep.
Do you remember like the nail? I don't know what it was, but it just smelled like a hardware store.
Yeah.
Hardware stores today don't smell like that anymore. I don't know what that smell was. I have no idea what made that smell. The hardware store
I totally know the smell you're talking about, but I could not describe it for the life of me.
All right. I get some design related question. Would you rather only be able to conduct user research via interpretive dance or through haiku poems?
Haiku poems.
I often think this would be like a hilarious improv skit. If somebody did like, user research. Like, I don't know if it's like, what if you were the researcher could only do interpretive dance, or is it the user can only talk to you in interpretive? You ask them a question and they have to do interpretive dance back.
That's what I thought you meant was like they had to dance while I was researching them. But okay, yeah.
It could go either way. It's an open-ended question. However you interpret it. All right. Would you rather work on a project with zero user feedback or different feedback from every single user? Not a single user agrees on anything.
Oh, boy. I think I'd still take the latter. I would take all of the feedback. Feedback's a gift in any way it comes. I'd figure out a way to wrangle it.
All right. Last question. Would you rather have your designs critiqued by Gordon Ramsay or Simon Cowell? Both when they're in a bad mood.
Oh, well, as you know, I've got a culinary background, so it's Gordon Ramsay all day. I would work as hard as I possibly could for him to call me an idiot sandwich.
I love it. All right. Gordon, it's funny. I don't know. I don't think either one is as big of a jerk as the editors on the reality TV show make them out to be. I think it's the editors that have made them seem like giant jerks. I don't know that they really are. They seem very nice in person. All right, Matthew, that is all for us for today. Thank you so much for coming on. Before we get out of here, why don't you give yourself a plug? Let everybody know where they can find you, connect with you, and all that stuff.
Yeah, so I keep a pretty low profile these days on the interwebs, but you can find me at LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there, Matthew McPhail. Happy to connect with anybody out there who's listening who wants to follow up or chat about building relationships or anything UX in general. That's the best place to find me.
Hot damn. And that's Matthew, that's McPhail with a PH, by the way, not an F. So if you are Googling that, McPhail. Matthew, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope others do. And at the end of the day, like we said, just try it. Just build relationships and just see what happens. I feel like you won't be disappointed.
Nothing to lose.
Nothing to lose. All right, Matt. Thanks so much, man.
See ya.
Well, all right, y'all, that's it from Matt and me for today. I hope we helped to shed a little bit light on relationships, and not only why relationships are important, but that there is actually a scientific, biological, psychological foundation for why relationships are so important. And it helps not just you do better work, it helps you with your job, with your career, with raises, promotions, opportunities, everywhere else. It is the basis for everything. So please, for the love of God, do not overlook the importance of relationships. And if you need to, head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some art prints that will remind you that you cannot build great software without great relationships. But I'm curious, how have you used relationships in your work? Have you used it to great effect? Has it helped you out? Let me know what you think on LinkedIn or shoot me an email at hello@beyonduxdesign.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would love it if you left a 5-star review. That would help me out so much more than you know. And if you know somebody who might find any of this stuff useful, then for the love of God, tell them about it. That would be fantastic. Don't forget to check out the Beyond UX Design shop. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to pick up some big, beautiful UX-themed art prints and digital downloads that you can print yourself. Get your paperback copy of Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes. Get free shipping on all orders over $30 and use the code LISTENER to get 10% off your entire order. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/shop to get your print on. Help keep the show independent and ad-free. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/support to find out how. You can join Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, Marty, and many others, and help keep the show independent and ad-free. You'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're even released. You get instant access to those videos right now for as little as $5 a month. And if you've been sitting on building your new website, Wix Studio can help get you there faster. Wix Studio is a powerful platform that lets you create and manage websites easily. And with Wix Studio, you can quickly adapt designs for every device, reuse assets, and my favorite, export from Figma, and much more. Check out beyonduxdesign.com/Wix to start creating today. And if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, do yourself a favor and check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/Mento and use the promo code BeyondUX200 for $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and check out all the past episodes along with all the show notes at beyonduxdesign.com. I hope you keep coming back for more great UX tips from Beyond UX Design. And until next time, remember, you're more than a designer because there's more to UX and design. I'll see you around. Take care, y'all.
You know, the gray is what kills me.
You're in Michigan, so it snows like, it starts in July, I think, and it goes all the way through June.
That's what it seems like. Yeah. Yeah, we get about 45 minutes of summer, which I spend at the lake. And then it's back to fall and winter.